Hi. So I think most of the people are still sleeping because we kept them up so late last night. You know, with the auction. I never had to do an auction before with 2 hours notice. Oh, Jerry, could you do an auction tonight and organize it? But we made about 500 euros. Not bad. What are you going to do?
Okay, thanks very much for everybody who joined the auction. We will see, we don't know the budget yet, so we will see if we need to cover some deficit, but I hope not. In that case, it will go to the Israelis for the next year's IDEC. Thank you.
So, actually, this is a PowerPoint, which is a networking, but it's a different kind of networking that we're used to. This is networking into the past, rather than networking like this. And some of you will know this stuff, and some of you, it'll be new, but it's the roots of alternative education, the roots of learner-centered education. And so I think hopefully some of this can be useful to you. You know, Arrow, I don't think I need to explain what we do, but it's later on in there. Most of you already, we've talked. But I'll just say briefly, I'm the director of Alternative Education Resource Organization. It networks learner-centered alternatives around the world. We help people start new alternatives. We have a conference every year. This year's conference is going to be in Portland, Oregon from the 3rd to the 7th of August. And we deliberately scheduled it later than usual so it wouldn't interfere with this IDEC. And we also have an online course for people starting new alternatives. And so you'll see some of this stuff later on if we ever get to the end of it. It's designed to be a lot longer. So let's just start and you'll see what it's all about. How are we going to do this?
Do you want to take the microphone?
What?
Do you want to take the microphone?
Okay, sure. Okay. So I had to use these pants once. You know, I mean, I brought them. Okay. So go to the next page, yeah. Okay, yeah, that's good. Oh, wait. All right, yeah, that's good. All right. So the alternative education movement goes back well before there was a name for it. In fact, it could be argued that what we now call alternative education and homeschooling was the norm for humankind for millennia. The difference in paradigm between what we now call alternative education and the current mainstream education is very dramatic. In 95% of the schools around the world, it seems that a basic belief is that children are naturally lazy and need to be forced to learn. Next, yeah. The paradigm for alternative learner-centered education is that children are natural learners and do not need to be forced to learn. In fact, modern brain research has shown that the more you force children to learn things that do not interest them, the more you extinguish the natural ability to learn. If you accept the first paradigm that children must be forced to learn, you need a whole series of external devices to force it. This would include competition for grades, homework, assignments, suppression of spontaneous learning, suppression of verbal interaction. In other words, you would have a typical classroom. If you believe in the second paradigm that children are natural learners, your main job would be to help find resources for the students, coach them in the direction they choose to go. You would have to develop the ability to listen well to them, to help determine these things. There are definitely differences in the ways alternative educators do this, which we'll talk about later, but the commonality is that it is a learner-centered approach. As I said, the alternative education movement goes back far into the past. It could be argued that the current public school system is just a relatively short experiment, unsuccessful, spanning only 150 years. The ideas behind a learner-centered approach keep on popping up throughout history, perhaps because they work. One early proponent was Jean-Jacques Rousseau, whose Emile, also known as On Education, was based on these ideas. What? I can't hear. What is it?
Slow down. Slow down. Slow down.
This is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Go ahead. The ideas behind a learner-centered approach keep on What is that? The same thing? Okay, that's a repeat. Forget it. Oh, here we go. No. Go back. Because there's something interesting in that. Yeah. Emile was banned in Paris and Geneva and was publicly burned in 1762, the year of its first publication. Ironically, during the French Revolution, Emile served as the inspiration for what became a new national system of education. Did you know they burned his books? Isn't that interesting? We move forward to Bronson Alcott. Born in 1799 and largely self-educated, he founded a series of controversial schools in the 1830s in the Philadelphia and Boston area. He was influenced by the European reformers such as Pestalozzi and Froebel. In 1830, with William Lloyd Garrison, he founded an anti-slavery society. Yeah, that's Bronson Alcott. One of the schools, the Temple School, because it operated out of a Masonic temple, was a forerunner of progressive and democratic schooling. It caused a lot of controversy because he accepted an African-American girl who refused to expel her. This is in 1830, not 1930. Many parents withdrew their students, and soon he was left with just a handful, including his own daughter, Louisa May Alcott. As you know, she went on to write books such as Little Men and Little Women, largely based on her experiences in her father's alternative school. How many people knew that? Did you know that? Interesting, huh? By the way, some of the connections back then were amazing. Emerson was a financial supporter of Alcott, and in 1845, Bronson Alcott lent his axe to David Thoreau so he could build a home at Walden Pond. Incredible, huh? Go ahead. There's Louisa May Alcott. Many of Alcott's educational principles are still used in classrooms today, including teach by encouragement, art education, music education, acting exercises, learning through experience, risk-taking in a classroom, tolerance in schools, physical education, recess, and early childhood education. The public school system starts. Horace Mann is often called the father of the American public education. Through his efforts, the underpinnings of the current public school system were created starting in the 1840s. Although his intentions were noble to help masses of illiterate and uneducated children, he was strongly influenced by a visit to study the education system in Prussia, which was very authoritarian. There's Horace Mann. The origin of comprehensive state-sponsored schooling in the industrial area can be traced to 19th century Prussia. This is what this guy, Don Pepper, says. In the early 1800s, Prussian military rulers implemented a national schooling program to ensure a supply of disciplined young soldiers capable of resisting any future Napoleonic-style invasion of their country. Under the guise of teaching young boys how to read and do numbers, Prussian schools grouped students by age rather than by knowledge or ability, sat them in rows of desks facing a teacher rather than arranging them in discussion circles, and rang a bell regularly as to discipline their day when they studied a variety of subjects. By the way, the idea of putting all kids in the same age creates a socialization situation that no one will ever experience again in their lives. For those people who said, what about socialization, right? It's not normal or natural. The British adapted the Prussian model when they needed to create their own cadre of professionals to administer their far-flung empire. And Horace Mann, one of the early proponents of public schooling in America, returned from an 1843 visit to Prussia full of ideas for implementing the same kind of system in the United States. The newly created public school system was revolutionary and well-intentioned, but it could be argued that from the very beginning it was following the first paradigm. For example, Mann said one of its purposes was to create obedient and compliant citizens. Education critic John Gatto, how many people have heard of John Gatto? I know John very well. You know he had a stroke and he's starting to write again, but he's paralyzed on one side in his apartment in New York City. In his book, Weapons of Mass Instruction, cited this quote by H.L. Mencken in 1924. The aim of public education is not to fill the young of the species with knowledge and awaken their intelligence. Nothing could be further from the truth. The aim is simply to reduce as many individuals as possible to the same level, to breed and train a standardized citizenry, to put down dissent and originality. That is its aim in the United States, and that is its aim everywhere else. Learner-centered education era starts. In reaction to this, several significant learner-centered approaches were created by educational pioneers such as Maria Montessori, Rudolf Steiner, Waldorf education, John Dewey, progressive education, A.S. Neal, founder of Summerhill School, and Francisco Ferrer, the modern school movement. How many people have heard of Ferrer, by the way? How many people haven't heard of him before? Yeah, it's an important guy. This was in Spain. You'll see what happened. At the same time, and subsequently, there were similar movements in other places, such as the work of Sri Aurobindo in India, Krishnamurti in India and Europe, and Frenet in France. So there's Montessori. Maria Montessori was born, grew up in Italy, graduating with a math-physics degree at the age of 20. She decided to pursue a degree in medicine, unheard of at the time for women. Despite opposition and hostility, she became a doctor and started to practice medicine in 1897. After working in a psychiatric clinic, she began to work with mentally disabled children. She worked in a school for such children while teaching courses for university students and developing materials. The students in the school were considered uneducable. Yet later, many passed tests for normal children. In 1907, she began to apply her ideas to mainstream children, at first working with low-income families in Rome. She refined her ideas, giving children freedom to pick materials that interested them, and coming and going to different spaces as they wished. Now there are thousands of Montessori schools around the world and over 5,000 in the United States. And that's a school I visited in California. Rudolf Steiner. This is very interesting historically. So he only lived 1861 to 1925, he was an Austrian philosopher, author, and spiritualist. He founded the Religious Society of Anthroposophy, which was an outgrowth of the field of theosophy. This was partly a result of his work in trying to merge science and spirituality. He also did pioneering work in biodynamic agriculture without the use of pesticides and chemical fertilizers, so he was way ahead of his time with that. He built the first Waldorf school in 1919. Now you see, he only lived to 1925, so isn't that amazing? He built the first Waldorf school in 1919. Based on his ideas in Stuttgart, Germany, Waldorf schools believe that dance, music, and art are as important as other academics. His ideas about democracy and social reform earned him the wrath of Adolf Hitler, who said that his anthroposophy was incompatible with National Socialist racial ideology. Although he died just a few years later, there are now thousands of Waldorf schools around the world, more than 100 in the United States, including public Waldorfs and many Waldorf-inspired schools. Then John Dewey. Dewey, 1859 to 1952, lived a long life, was born in Burlington, Vermont. He was a writer, psychologist, and philosopher, but perhaps best known for establishing the progressive school movement. He had a profound belief in democracy and wrote about it extensively. In the early 1900s, Dewey was a professor at the University of Chicago and established the University of Chicago laboratory schools that demonstrated his pedagogical ideas about learner-centered education. He wrote School and Society, largely based on his experiences with the school, and later, Democracy and Education. After falling out with his administration, he went on to teach at Columbia's Teachers College. Although he spoke strongly about against a pure curriculum-based education, he was also worried about the other extreme, that it might minimize content and the role of the teacher. He felt the content must be presented so that it relates to the students' experiences. Hundreds of progressive schools were created according to his philosophical concepts, many which continue today, along with the annual Progressive Education Conference. One of Dewey's disciples was Dr. Royce Stanley Pitkin. As a student, Pitkin studied under Dewey at Teachers College. Dewey eventually helped Pitkin establish Goddard College's program in 1938, which became one of the most radical colleges in the world. As a brief aside, I once heard Pitkin speak about Dewey's lectures. He quoted Dewey telling a story that illustrates what he thought of school testing. He said that it's the way old farmers used to judge the weight of a pig. They get a board and put a pig on one side, then they'd find a big stone that would balance it. Then they would guess the weight of the stone. That was what he thought about testing. Francisco Ferrer. So here's the story of Ferrer. From 1859 to 1909 was a Catalan, and by the way, there's people from Catalonia here who got something going, anarchist who started what became known as modern schools. He was born near Barcelona. Exiled for his anarchism, he returned to found Modern School, Escuela Moderna, in 1901. It was the first non-religious coeducational school in Spain and ran democratically. What happened? Jailed again. So what happened is Ferrer was jailed and then accused of plotting against the king. And he was executed in 1909. In his name, they started modern schools all over the world, including about 200 in Spain. And they went until Franco came. One of them was in New York, and that was started in New York City and then was moved to Stelton, New Jersey. The last modern school closed in 1958, which is a shame because it was 3 years before the publication of Summerhill. There was almost an overlap. They may have been able to continue after that. But the people who went to that modern school have a reunion still every year. Unbelievable. And I go to it most of the time. For example, I met one guy when he was only 100 years old. Alfred Levitt. And he had come through Ellis Island and heard about the school, went down, and he heard there was going to be a nude sitting, and but the model didn't show up. So he offered to be the nude in exchange for tuition. He was, I think, 16. And so he became a student at that school. His teacher was Will Durant, you know, who wrote all the books about philosophy. And one of the students in the school was Ariel, and 14-year-old girl, and they had an affair. And it was quite a scandal, and they told him that he was going to have to leave the school at the end of the year. And afterwards, Durant said, I didn't know whether to adopt her or marry her. But he married her. They became the most famous writing couple of the century. It's quite an amazing story. And so it's interesting. Alfred had a presentation of his artwork because he became a famous artist himself. 20 of his pictures, of his paintings, are at the Metropolitan Museum. And I went to a special event featuring his paintings and his other work, and he actually spoke without a microphone at the age of 103 at Ellis Island. Anyway, that was the modern school. It's really something interesting. All right, so let's go on here. Yeah, I just skipped through the modern school. So this is Nellie and Jim Dick. Nellie is the person I found out about the modern school from when she was only 96. And this is people who actually came from the modern school back to Barcelona at the 100th anniversary of Ferrer's death. All right, now ask Neil. I think we can skip through it because we've already heard a presentation on Summerhill. Oh, wait, go back a little bit. Let's see. Let me see, that where are we supposed to be? Yeah. Where is this? School within, oh no, I think you skipped too much. Go back. Hold on. Okay, keep going. All right, so we'll go there. Oh, that's just a picture of a school within a public alternative school that was founded in 1971. You see, all this came as a result of the publication of Summerhill in the early 1960s. First, there was the free school movement, and then after that, the alternative school movement that the public schools had. And that's, a lot of this came from the publication of Summerhill. Okay, go ahead. Keep going. Yeah, there's a meeting. Oh, I got to tell you the story about this picture. It's pretty funny. Yeah, go back to that. Yeah, what happened is that there was a rule at Summerhill that you could not play any games in the morning in the computer room. So they passed the computer out the window so they could play the games. Anyway, go ahead. All right, no, go back, okay. So before the establishment of many free schools or alternative schools in the United States, half the students at Summerhill were American. Now most of them come from Asia. And this is, these pictures here are actually from the IDEC that was in Korea, where there are 200 illegal democratic schools. And so that's a picture I took. Actually, those kids are here. I taught them ping pong at the IDEC in Korea. Go ahead, yeah. Around the world, there are now many hundreds of democratic schools. indirect progeny of Summerhill, this despite the fact that, unlike Montessori and Steiner, Neil actively discouraged people from copying Summerhill. He felt that people needed to create their own form of innovative schools. Okay, go ahead. This is some of the ones. This is Albanese Free School in Albany, New York. It's interesting, that school, founded by Mary Loya, she bought up a bunch of inner city row houses for as low as $500, had her community fix them all up and renovate them, and the rent money pays a lot of the cost of keeping that school going. So therefore it has a lot of low-income kids. And it's racially diverse. You know, you've heard this issue a lot. So is Brooklyn Free School, one of the schools that we helped to start. And more than half the kids are minority kids. It has a sliding scale tuition.
I just have to say, I've also been to the Albanese Free School, and also 2 Finnish women have been there for practice.
I can't hear, it's so echoey. All right, yeah, go ahead. One startling example as possible has taken place in a small country of Israel. In the 1980s, Yaakov Hecht, I know him somewhere, started the Democratic School of Hadera. Anyway, you know about this, go ahead. This is from Hadera, some pictures I took there. Yeah, go ahead. No, so there are at-risk public alternatives. Now, you know what happened is they took our idea of alternative education and they stole it from us, and they called, some of them were dumping grounds for their problem kids, and they called them alternative, but some of them are good, and it's hard to tell which ones are and which ones aren't. But one of the best ones, one of the most impressive at-risk schools I've ever seen is Nuestra Escuela in Puerto Rico. Have you heard of it? You know, the thing that amazed me is when I was visiting there is that these kids are kind of kids from difficult backgrounds, and they hug and kiss every kid as they come in. We should do that here, right? And I talked to one kind of former gang leader, and he says, I only go there for the hugs and kisses. Go ahead. I think they know those people, yeah. All right, charter schools. In 1993, Joe Nathan helped start the first charter school in Minnesota. The concept was to create innovative public schools that would not be bound by the usual red tape. This would be done through agencies outside the usual local control. To some extent, this worked at first, but there are some good examples of innovative charter schools. But as time has gone on, charters have become more and more standardized and have been subject to the No Child Left Behind Common Core curriculum. This has considerably handicapped innovation. There are now more than 5,000 charter schools. Some complain that they have been taken over by corporations, and a lot of them have. Joe Nathan still believes in them. Go ahead. So that's a charter school I visited. It's very interesting. I did a consultation there and demonstrated democratic process. And as I was getting ready to leave, the kids came over to me and they said, if we can't get you to come back again, this is never going to happen. And it didn't happen. Go ahead. So what is Arrow's role? Arrow, my organization, in the educational alternatives. All right, go ahead. All right, so our mission is to build the critical mass for the education revolution by providing resources which promote a learner-centered approach to education and support self-determination in learning. We support a variety of efforts to redefine education in place of standardized, authoritarian, and centralized system that determines what every child should know and be able. We call for diversity, experimentation, freedom. We want to make a learner-centered approach available as a choice everywhere. Go ahead. Okay, keep going. All right, so these are some of our networks. Democratic schools, if you go to the Arrow website, which is educationrevolution.org, it's also edrev.org, E-D-R-E-V. But I got tired of explaining it to people. So it's either way, you can get there. So we have a list of democratic schools. We have a list of member schools. And of course, we are also involved with independent alternatives, home education, Waldorf, Montessori, charter schools, public choice and at-risk, and higher education alternatives. Some of the things we offer. We have the website, which is the #1 website on Google if you Google alternative education. The Aero Conference, which I told you about. Online magazine. How many people are signed up to get our e-newsletter every week? How many people didn't know there was such a thing? Yeah, well, okay, if you go to the website, it's free on every page to sign up. And this has got all the news of what's going on in alternative education. We have a School Starters online program where we help to start 100 schools. We do consultations and so on. I think that somebody's coming to chase me away. So oh, is time up? Are we done? Time? Yeah? Okay, let's just flip through and see if there's anything else. Keep going. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, we have an online bookstore. You know, you can get books from us. I've got about half a dozen books here if you're interested. You want to get them without shipping. And our speakers, this year our speaker for our conference is Young Zhao. And also Peter Gray. And last year we had this guy who was really good. He was talking about some innovative stuff he did in India, Sugata Mitra. That's he was one of our keynote. And we had another guy who Skyped in, Yakov Hecht, that's what it was. Remember that? I have a picture, by the way, if you want to see what it looked like when Sugata was complaining that Yakov was 10 times bigger than him on the screen. But anyway, that's enough. Thanks.